Hello, my name is Ariana Fitro, and I will be your host for today's professional development. A little bit about myself. I've been teaching for 6 years. I taught 4 years in second grade and 2 years in kindergarten. I'm currently in my working on my master's degree to become a reading specialist. Having said all that, I am so honored to be here with you today, and let's get started. Today's professional development is titled Children's Literature to Facilitate Critical Pedagogical Practices in the Classroom. But first, let's get to know each other a little bit better. This icebreaker, it's called This or That. I'd like for you to get in groups of four. You don't have to leave your chair or your table and choose between two objects to describe yourself. For example, choose between the following to describe yourself. Are you a hammer or a feather? In choosing between the two, you need to think about the characteristics of a hammer and a feather, and you also need to connect those characteristics to your own personality. Let's go ahead. I'll set a timer for about 2 minutes. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that icebreaker and got to know each other a little bit better. It's also something you can do in your classrooms, and it can be used cross-curricularly as well. All right, just a little bit of housekeeping. Our norms for today's PD is to be fully present, limit sidebars, use technology appropriately, ensure everyone's voice is heard, and start and end on time. I know how precious time is when you're a teacher. Let's begin by defining critical literacy and critical pedagogy. Critical literacy. Comer 2001 describes critical literacies as involving people using language to exercise power, to enhance everyday life in schools and communities, and to question practices of privilege and injustice. Critical pedagogy. According to Scorza, Mirren, Morell, 2013, as a framework, critical pedagogy can also serve as both an educator's philosophical and methodological approach to teaching and learning by empowering students to actively generate and privilege their own historical tradition through problem-posing activity and the practice of reflection. Having said that, let's talk a little bit about the research. According to Comer 2006, in a number of studies in high poverty and culturally diverse environments, I have closely observed teaching practice that made a positive difference in children. From a synthesis of these studies, I argue that such teaching requires teachers to simultaneously engage in and orchestrate different kinds of work. 1. Interpretive work. 2. Pedagogical work. 3. Discursive work. 4. Relational work. And 5. Institutional work. As we are reviewing the research and the theorists behind critical literacy and critical pedagogy, I want you all to listen. Listen for themes that you're hearing in the work and the research. Vasquez, 2007, reflects of the coursework of the work I have done, especially with preschool-age children, a consistent question asked of me has been, do young kids really talk about social issues or equity issues? And why can't we just let them be kids? This is often followed with, preschoolers don't really talk like that, do they? Meaning as critical participants and analysts. My experience in working with young children has proven time and time again that children are in fact very capable and willing to participate in hard conversations that are meaningful to them and that impact their lives. We believe the shift in the socio-political identities of our youth indicates success. Instead of programs like the CYR and BMYA being perceived as extras or having values because they can improve test scores or help students get better grades, schools should be looking at these programs to understand how their activities demonstrate that students learn, develop academic competencies, and produce college-level work. Scorza, Mirren, Morell, 2013, go on to say, in each case, the use of critical pedagogy helped motivate urban youth of color to succeed academically as the relationship between culture and schooling was deconstructed and reconstructed, building upon their cultural heritage. Now, I found it important to include research from preschool to high school because I know that there are grade levels from young, from early education to the higher grades. And so that's why I wanted to include research that was meaningful to everybody in the room. I'd like to go into a little bit about the theory. Where did critical pedagogy come from, or critical literacy? And that's where we get into Paulo Freire. Critical literacy is a theoretical framework founded in the work of Paulo Freire. Freire experienced extreme poverty and hunger in 1930s Brazil when the government upended the family's middle-class existence. This experience led to Freire writing the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed. In the book, Freire describes a phenomenon called conscientization. Conscientization is becoming aware of your own reality, how to interpret it, and how to change it. And this is all done through literacy. Now, because of this critical literacy, there is frameworks that are created to deliver the pedagogy of teachers, critical pedagogy into their classroom through practices, right? Methodological and also theoretical. And so one person that I'd like to talk to you about today is Robinson Throop. And when I'm going to read his framework to you, you're going to say, okay, well, he's talking about using critical pedagogy with math, but that's the beauty in it. You can replace math with RLA, you can replace math with science, social studies. It's cross-curricular. And that's what's amazing about incorporating critical pedagogy into the classroom. Now, he goes on to the whole point of the PD today is how do we use children's literature to incorporate critical pedagogy into our classrooms? And he's created a framework for not only selecting it, but using it. So let's talk about that a little bit. Illuminating possibilities for ruminizing mathematics learning. Remember, you can replace mathematics with any subject. The framework provides a lens for me to analyze children's literature through 4 pedagogical perspectives. And really, when we think about our critical literacy and the way that we perceive the world, we don't teach critical literacy. It's actually a lens in which we see the world through, and through our pedagogical practices in the classroom, we also are in open communication with students so that they can also develop their own critical lens. And this is a framework that Throop proposes. 1, building relationships refers to how students see themselves in relation to others and with mathematics. Again, replace mathematics with whatever subject you'd like. 2, thinking mathematically means connecting with students' ideas. Reading the world recalls Freire's vision for students to think critically about the world and their place in it. So here we can see where the theory comes in. 3, looks like I left out 3. I'll have to go back and correct my slide. But let's move on to 4. I do have this in another location for you. 4, integrating for learning conveys a hope for applying students' ideas in ways that honor their diverse and unique ways of knowing. Okay, sounds amazing. We have a framework. But if you're anything like me, you're wondering, well, how do I implement this framework in my classroom? Okay, let's talk about that a little bit. Before I get into examples of critical pedagogical practice examples, I hope that some of the themes that you saw that were connected in the theory and in the research was that the whole purpose of having this critical literacy lens and implementing these critical pedagogical practices in your classroom is because it is for the success of students. Because when students are seeing themselves in the literature, or they are being able to take things, just like they said with education, where they deconstructed it and reconstructed it, and they saw themselves and how they fit into that landscape and to that context, I hope that the message that's coming across through that is that all of this is for them. So some examples, and it's actually, if I can go back for a moment, it's actually for you too, because when we reframe the way that we think about things, it really does change the dialogue that we're having with students about things that affect them. And then in turn, they can feel accepted and begin to start learning. And so, one quick thing from Frede that I did want to bring up is that he talked about a banking system where all the power is in the hands of a teacher, and it's a banking system where they become the depositors and they just are depositing information to be retained into the minds of students. But what is more meaningful? Learning something that applies to you, that affects you, and that you know that you can change, or regurgitating information that has no meaning to you? I'll leave you with that on Frede. Now, some examples. Okay, so we have a framework, right? He gave us a framework. Fantastic. What does that look like in the classroom? When I first began studying about this, really all I thought was, okay, we're just talking about things. And that is it. It is a lot of it, but that's not everything. Communication is key and it must go both ways. So let's look at using read alouds. In this article, it talks about how you can use children's literature to have an open dialogue in different ways about characters and situations that is incorporating critical pedagogical practices in your classroom through picture walks and just really open dialogue. So that is one very easy way to incorporate it, right? We don't want to think of this as an additional thing that you have to do, but a meaningful pedagogy that you are implementing for the benefit of all students, right? So this is one example of the way that you can use a pedagogical practice in your classroom. And if you click on that link, it will take you to the article. Now that you've gone and looked at that article, what did you observe? What are some questions and comments that you have about what you read in that article? For our next example of a critical pedagogical practice, I'd like for you to think of children's literature as an opportunity to be a mirror where a student can see themselves reflected back at them through the text and characters, or a window where other students can see into the lives of others, creating understanding that of differences, right? So I'm going to go, and this is all through storytelling. Storytelling is a very powerful tool. And I'd like for you to watch this video, and then we'll have a short discussion after.
I knew a little bit about this last year, but now we went way more in depth, and it was a little bit heartbreaking to learn about this. So this is Cooper Island Residential School, and they got here in a canoe, and this is a dock, and these are bits of road.
Why did you create this?
So people could see how far they have to go to actually put them in a residential school.
Critical literacy is inviting children to look beyond themselves, and it's about taking up topics of power, inequality, and social justice.
You can start anywhere. Take a text that is meaningful, that's about an important topic or issue, and begin with the students and asking them, what do you see here? You can even do a picture walk to start to say, what do you notice in the picture?
All over the school, we're focused on connecting the kids' world to the world. So we want to help them see themselves as agents in the bigger story.
A metaphor that we use is text as either mirrors or windows. They get a sense of belonging when they can see themselves in a text. Texts as windows, on the other hand, are looking out into a world that's different than themselves.
We chose storytelling as one of the learning branches when we were planning a unit around residential schools. It was important because in all of the learning that we do, it starts with the student's personal story, their funds of knowledge. And so starting from that foundation and then making the connections to the stories that were shared by people who survived residential schools was kind of a natural fit. They began with telling stories that had to be true, stories from their own families. Then we explored stories that were true and from the families of people who were affected by Canada's legacy and who are still being affected. And so now, because of that mirrored experience, the children can see their story as ongoing and they can see the story of residential schools as ongoing. They can imagine how those stories will intersect.
What's going on in this one?
So the oil has spilled from the pipeline. Yeah. The oil is now leaking into the pond. So they're now going to get affected by it, especially. Some people did more things about treaties. I focused more on the Kinder Morgan pipeline because I didn't even know what that was at the time. Last year we did a lot of textbook reading and stuff like that, but it's so much better when you get to pick which group you want to be in, pick what you want to use to learn with. I'm not very good out of the textbook, but I'm really good on technology. This is actually a little bit more interesting to me. So
Through critical literacy approach, there are multiple texts, media, there's television, there's visual images.
I decided to make a board game on a thing I learned. You play it together with lots of people, so then if you share a piece of learning that maybe is not in the board game, other people will learn it too, and you can also learn new things.
We ask questions like who's represented, who is missing, whose voice is being silenced, who's being privileged, and in this way, children get to look at a book not just one way.
But what I love to see in my students is the confidence that comes out when they practice agency, when they practice seeing themselves as part of an ongoing story.
I feel that instead of speaking or writing, it's better for me when I have art. I want to make them think a lot about what's behind the meaning of the picture, and then they think about the residential school.
They were starting to go, oh, like my grandma also came from England, or we also do that on Father's Day. And the connections started to get built really strongly. That was kind of where I started to implement critical literacy, was looking at themselves and really involving the families in that part of the journey as well, as such a wealth of knowledge for the students themselves, but also for me to understand where my students were coming from and who they came from. I think if they're not feeling safe and comfortable in their environment, they're not going to take off their shoes and put somebody else's shoes on.
So right now, Ashley is doing a fantastic project around inquiry with kindness. She'll talk about what does it mean to be a kind neighbor. So we look at the areas around in our community, or what does it mean to be kind to your fellow classmates or to your teacher. Even on the other end of the spectrum too, not just what does it mean to be kind, but why might someone be a bully?
Why should we be nice to bullies if they're not nice to us? Do you guys feel like you've discovered the answer to those questions a little bit?
I used to think if I was friends with a bully, I would be a bully. I learned you can be anyone's friend in the world.
They're asking questions, and they found out why bullies are mean because they have pain in their hearts if some person died and they want to protect themselves.
A big change that I've seen in a student is probably Neo. He never hesitates to go to a child that looks sad to ask them how they're feeling. He'll voluntarily make kindness rocks just to go give to that one specific child sometimes, which is, well, it warms my heart for sure.
We talked a lot about what makes a good neighbor and why being a neighbor of a school would be good or bad, and looked at those pros and cons. The kids really wanted to just say thank you. Like, hey, we know it's tough sometimes to be a neighbor of a school. We know we're really noisy. We also recognize that kindness doesn't just have to do with people. They thought, hey, if I give a plant, it's not only going to make somebody smile, but maybe that'll help out our environment and the animals and insects in our environment as well.
Our youngest children often teach us the most because the questions they raise and the perspectives they see really bring forth their funds of knowledge in ways that take us out of our adult school-oriented ways of being and instead into place-conscious, local, and diverse ways of knowing that come and are found right in our children.
So I think through all of this, the biggest thing I've seen is their walls come down. They are no longer inside their box. There is no box. They are accepting of others. They're convinced that their kindness is going to go around the world. And I think that they're right. It's really neat to see them feel so empowered about these actions that they're doing.
I knew a little bit about this last year.
Wow, what a powerful video. I love the way the teacher said, if they don't feel comfortable and safe enough to take off their shoes, how can they put anybody else's on? So I'd like to ask you all, what did you observe? What did you notice? What are some questions and comments that you had about the video? An additional critical pedagogical practice example that you could implement in your classroom is called digital storytelling. And I'd like to play so I have two examples here, and I'd like to play the second video, which is actually a student-made example of digital storytelling. However, when we break out and you are working on your project, I'd like for you, if this is something you're interested, to go back and, for time's sake, watch on your own time the digital storytelling components. So what digital storytelling is basically everything that was happening in that classroom, except for now it is using a digital format. And this is also very powerful. So here is Spare a Nickel, a Great Depression.
While shopping with my 7-year-old daughter, I noticed a small apple stack. There was a sign above it saying, "Help a vet, apples only 5 cents." Rummaging through my pockets, a sigh escaped my lips as I found nothing. My daughter approached the man beside the apple stack and handed him a very dirty nickel from her pocket and asked for an apple. This was only a year ago. Our family cannot spare any more money to anyone in this kind of economy. Ever since Black Tuesday of 1929, or what many refer to as Wall Street crash, our family has gone from normal to worse conditions. My husband purchased several stocks over the years as an investment in our future, but overnight everything was gone. The stock market crash was unexpected. Many people used their credits and didn't have enough money to pay back on time. Billions of dollars were lost to everyone, but a few lucky ones. Little fortune was saved before it all went down the toilet. My husband lost his job and is currently looking for anything that has a good enough pay to keep our family fed. My daughters barely have enough clothing to cover their backs, and most importantly, they've been fussing about food. They don't want beans and crust of black bread anymore. Instead, they want round steak and a loaf of white bread like they were used to having. I've been thinking of doing some little jobs for extra money, but then again, all the jobs are taken, and there are none left to spare. My husband is willing to sell his grandfather's army medals for just $1, except who would want to buy them? Everything seems so horrible and downhill for us, though I know my husband and I have to stay strong for the children. Although sometimes I wonder what the government is doing with this kind of crisis. President Hoover tried to give out an effort like volunteer service, but it never worked out. In March of 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt won the election for president, and little by little, hope seemed to reborn once again. The president made the bill called the New Deal, making work for men, just like building new areas everywhere, like parks and fields. We were excited because just maybe this was our chance of changing. My husband got accepted to the workforce from the New Deal and is paid $1 each day. My children were thrilled when they saw white bread and creamy milk on the dinner table. Having only these basic things was an ordinary thing for 5 more years. My daughters were old enough to have a small job and help the family with rent. I myself did not go out at all. I stayed as a housewife and waited for the family to come and welcome them back. Then the biggest event happened out of nowhere. America was helping out in World War II. President Roosevelt concentrated on the Lend-Leasing Act. Our goods and money were sent out to our allies, and taxes were impossible to manage. Around 1939 and 1940, the government stated that the Great Depression had ended. When I look back into this, I have no idea how my family ever survived during this time, though I know that during my lifetime, a lot of events have happened. I'm hoping that the future doesn't make any mistakes like these again. It'd be horrible for America to relive these years, though I know the government and the people of America need to stay together for this. This lesson should already be learned. Making the same mistake twice says a lot about one country.
Digital story.
While shopping with my
What is
Okay, so what an incredible way to infuse critical thinking skills with digital tools. What are some things that you observed? What are some questions and comments that you have, or even concerns about how you would implement that kind of lesson into your classroom? All right. Now it is time to put what we have learned into use. We have an activity. We are going to be using a text set resource guide, which you can access through the presentation by clicking here. You're going to work in groups to select a text from the guide. There's a list of different texts that you can choose from, and you're going to develop a student activity. Now, this is going to be completely up to you, how difficult or not difficult you want it to be. Please review the examples that I provided in the presentation to give you some ideas of how you might want to incorporate that into an activity. Maybe one of those strategies, or you can come up with something completely on your own. Use the text set outline. Now remember, that's going to go back to Throop's framework, right? For the different components that we can use to incorporate critical pedagogical practices, and just pick one of them, at least one of them. Now, you might find that as you're working through your activity, there are many of them that start to get layered in, right? Kind of going back to the storytelling of the mirroring and the windows. There's so many different layers that actually start to come out when you incorporate these questions and these activities. And then while you're doing that, I'm going to be coming around and I'm going to be working with you. If you get stuck or you need a little bit more information on something, I'm going to be coming around and assisting you as you complete your project. I'm going to give you about 20 minutes to work on this. You can work on it in groups if you'd like. You can work on it at your table. It's totally up to you. I want to give you that autonomy to choose how you want to create your activity. And then afterwards, we will present the activities. We'll have about 20 minutes to do that as well. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Your time starts now. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much. I saw how much everybody was engaged and asking questions. And once you started to really grasp it, you just became very, you kind of ran with it. And I love that. Let's go ahead and share some of the activities that were developed. Please be sure to say what grade level you work and go ahead and share your activity. Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing your activities. It was all informational. I'd like for us to, if you could email me your activities, I'd like to send it out to everybody. That way we have all of those activities as a resource for the future. This is the time of the PD where if you have any glows, so if anything was glowing to you, I'd love for you to share that. If anything needs to grow, if there was a part that you felt could have been executed better, don't worry, you're not going to hurt my feelings. This is all self-reflection for me so that I can be a better presenter for you. And last, if you'll please fill out this exit ticket. It's a one-question exit ticket. If you click here, it will take you to a Google form. Thank you so much. My name is Ariana Fitro, and it's been a pleasure presenting to you today.